Good evening, everyone. We continue on our study in the book of First Samuel, and we are covering chapter 21 today. As we recall from yesterday's class, David has now made a pact with Jonathan. They both kiss each other, wept as if they are going to separate and never see each other again. And the pact requires the house of David to have kindness over the house of Jonathan. Now, as David left the place, Jonathan went back to the city. And the story continues. And where did David go? Here it says David came to Nov. Now, Nov is a place where the tabernacle and the altar was set up after Shiloh. Now, when we started the book of First Samuel, everything was at Shiloh, and when the Philistines came and took over the Ark of the Covenant, and eventually they had great problems, and it was returned to the Israelites, and the Ark of the Covenant or the Ark of God was kept at Kiriath Yearim, and that it was there for 20 years. So in the meantime, Shiloh had reassigned the tabernacle to this place called Nov. It was near Gilgal, and Ahimelech was the priest there. And Ahimelech, when he came to meet David, he was trembling. Now, the word trembling literally shows that he was terrified, right? He was terrified to see David. Now, you may wonder why, because you don't get visitors like David every day. And so he asked David, why are you alone and no one with you? And you can see that this in itself is an A and a B. A and a B. So take a look at this. The word alone. Alone is really by himself. That's what it means, by himself. And this idea, no one with you, also says that he is by himself. It is basically two ways of saying the same thing. Why are you by yourself? Now, this is important. The idea here is that there are no one with him. That is traditional, right? He is the chief of 1,000. And why is he here alone? Was there something that has gone on? And that would be the question that Ahimelech, the Kohen, is really asking David. So understand how the Hebrew expresses itself, and it makes itself quite clear. Reading into verse 2, and David said to Ahimelech the Kohen, and observe what David says. The king, who is the king? Saul. Saul has, it says here, Saul has commissioned me with a matter. Now, the word commission here it's about command, right? It is about charging him. So commanded. Of course, in the English, there are various words that can represent this, and in the thesaurus you find equivalent words, so that you don't keep using the word command. It's not good English style. And so we should understand when we read the English translation of the Bible, we are actually reading English styled writing. And so the same Hebrew word, zavach, Zava is actually translated in various ways. For example, here, commission, charge, command. give order, appoint. Now, all of these are the same Hebrew word. And so be aware that there is the situation like this where you have one Hebrew word and you can get multiple English words to represent for the sake of style. And so he charged him with a matter, and this word is davar. Now, davar is matter, issue, complaint, things of that nature. It's the same Hebrew word, and has said this to me, and so he relays the essence of the commission, right? He says, let no one know anything about the matter on which I am sending you and with which I have commissioned you. And I have directed the young man to a certain place. Let's break this down a little bit. So it says, let no one know anything about this davar, this matter, right? These are the same thing on which I am sending you. Now, the word sending is sending you to represent me, right? That's the word shalach, sending David to represent Saul, with which I have commissioned, and that's the same word, commissioned, commanded you. And I have, well, it says here, directed. I think we can say, we can use the word I have pointed. The young man who traditionally would be following David to a certain place. Now, this word is a very interesting Hebrew word. This really means to a place which I cannot tell. Basically, David says, "Well, they are going somewhere, and you're not supposed to know." All right, and so let's break this down. Nobody is supposed to know that the king is sending, and the men that follows David has gone somewhere else. And don't ask any questions, so don't ask, don't tell. Now, this starts to become an issue to modern day reading because when they read this, it seems that David is miscommunicating or misrepresenting Saul in this matter because the king never did charge David on a secret mission. So this whole thing here is very much like a secret mission, and that's a story. That's a line that David has given to Ahimelech, the Kohen who is there at Nov. And so people would think that, well, aren't David not being truthful here, and gets into a moral twist. One of the things that I could say on this particular topic, and we'll get there down in the later verses, similar things are happening as well. And we need to then understand that this is not considered lying in the Hebrew context. There is a word that is, or there are a number of words that are used to describe deceit, lies, telling untruth for the purpose of hurting and cheating. Now, all of those are forbidden, or in the Torah of the Israelites amongst the community, that they are not supposed to cheat and hurt and lie to each other. But in this particular case, in verse 2, he comes and discloses something which is untrue, but is not there to hurt Ahimelech the priest, but it is actually intended to protect a life. And whose life are we talking about to protect? In this case, David, a man after God's heart. And this was the action and words and choice of words that is used And this will bring us to think about this case very hard, similar to uh, how Abraham spoke to Pharaoh in Genesis chapter 12. Again, Isaac spoke to Avimelech, the Philistine king. How Rahab spoke to the soldiers in Jericho, to distract them and allow the Israelites to escape. Now, all of these are very similar situations, of which the nature of these conversations and words spoken is with the purpose of protecting a life and not hurting another life. And thereby you find that, I guess, in World War II, where many people had hid uh, the Jews from the Nazis and saved them from the Holocaust by saying certain words that mislead, miscommunicate. I will use those words carefully, with the intent of saving Jewish lives. And you would find that throughout the Torah, as well as into the writings and the prophet books, you find that there is a distinction of this kind of a communication to protect a life, and it's not considered a lie, where God would have very harsh words to say about persons who have unjust weights, who intends to hurt another, who lies and who hides the things that they do that is against God, and pretend that nothing and everything is good. And that is also called a way of hiding the facts. Now, in so doing, when it is against God and you pretend that it's not, then God takes exception to that. All right, that is like covering itself. Now, in this case, it's David trying to protect his life, and that is allowed, at least from what we can see in the text. In verse 3, David asks Ahimelech, he says, "What do you have on hand?" Now, what he's talking about is to eat, because they have been running away, and so they're asking something to eat. Say, can you give me, in verse 3, give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever can be found, again, to eat, right? It's not for anything else. It's about food, nourishment. And so 5 loaves of bread basically says it's 5 bread. So it's 5 of bread. And the word loaves in this case is not found in the Hebrew, but it's not wrong. This is an English style, right? If the English translation says 5 bread, it won't sound very good. So the translator had inserted loaves inside. But basically, we understand five, uh, five, well, I wouldn't say 5 pieces, right? It would be 5 bread that can be filling. And then you find that David says, whatever can be found. Everything is about eating. I think you can find that they were hungry. The priest answered David and said, there is no ordinary bread on hand. Now, this one you have to understand. This word ordinary is used as kol. It means that this is common bread. What is the difference? Well, you can find it this way. You have common bread, and then you would find that there is holy bread. This is holy. So what's the difference between common bread and holy bread? Aren't they bread? And yes, they are. So there is a difference. Common bread is what they make to eat uh, in general life. Holy bread is used in tabernacle ritual. And after that, has certain rules for consumption. And we will see this, right? And that's the difference between common bread and holy bread. And so look at what Ahimelech says. Now, if that's the case, if only the young men have kept themselves from women, based on the law, but based on the Torah, uh, if the young men have been with women that day, they will be unclean until evening. And they have to clean themselves. Now, it is important for us to realize that when we talk about holy bread, it has to follow God's rules. And as such, the priest is very concerned about God's rules. And so David answered the priest and said to him, surely women have been kept from us previously as I set out, and the vessels of the young men were holy. Now, verse 5, it says, they have been kept from us. This means restrained. But principally, you say that the young man has not had a woman. The vessels of the young men were holy. And by implication, the vessels here would mean the men's sexual organs, right? I guess you could say that. Their vessels, their organs were holy because they have not been used for sex. And in so doing, they are considered holy or undefiled in that sense. Though it was an ordinary journey, how much more then today will their vessels be holy, that they have not had a woman for a few days. So according to God's rules, the men are considered clean and therefore can consume holy bread. Verse 6, so the priest gave him the holy things, right? These are the holy things. And we're talking about the bread. So the translator would fill in the blank here and say, well, it's bread. All right. For there was no bread, but the bread of presence. Now, why do they call this the bread of presence? Uh, you would know that we commonly call this bread the show bread. And there are 12 pieces of showbread. And the showbread was instructed of Moses to be placed every day fresh. And they represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is to be said that this is the bread of the face. I think if you want to look at it in a more direct sense, this is called the bread of the face. And what does that mean? It is the bread of the face of God. That the bread itself is always in the face of God or before God or in the presence of God. That's how the translator used this. And in order to put hot bread, it has to be taken away. So the showbread is made every day. And so they had this showbread, the bread of the bread of the face or before the face of God. Now, this is an important element because this one was supposedly consumed by the priests themselves so that it's not thrown away. And in so doing, the priest require whoever eats of it to be holy, to be clean, so that you will not sin before God. Now, that in itself is a text which we need to figure out, struggle with, and the whole guise of the matter was Ahimelech didn't need to know why David was there. Verse 7 now gives us a twist in the plot. Now, one of the servants of Saul was there that day for a sacrifice, perhaps. Now, in verse 7, it says here he was, well, I guess, restrained, right? He was detained. He stopped before the Lord. I think this would be a better word. He stopped. He was stopping there, or maybe we should say he was stopping there before the Lord. Of course, he was there to make sacrifices. And his name was Doeg. He was an Edomite. He was the, I guess, the strong man. How would you say this? He was the mighty man of Saul's shepherds. And so you could say that he was the chief, he was the leader, he was the big guy, right? He was the big guy. But now we have the presence of Saul's man. And then we have David right there. And these two cannot meet, because the moment they meet, then Saul will know where David is. So David is going away to hide. So now is the plot twist in verse 7. In verse 8, now David said to Ahimelech, now again, I point out to you, watch the words that is spoken. The conversation of David is now playing a role. He is in role. So now is there not a spear or a sword on hand? Means, do you have something ready, right? Or readily available. And so David says, for I brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me. Why? Because the king's matter was very urgent. Now, again, you find this, it is to protect a life. Whose life? David's life. Because of Doeg, who was the chief, the mighty man of the shepherds of Saul, he cannot know where David is. And in the event he is caught, he has to fight. And he's got nothing. And so he said all these things. So be aware of the conversation of David, that he is not considered as lying to Ahimelech, because he is there to protect a life, which is permissible. Then the priest said, look, the sword of Goliath, the Philistines, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, look, it is wrapped in a cloth. Now, let me then point out this other word, behind the ephod. Now, the word behind is the word after, right? The word after. It is not normally used this way. The after of the ephod. Now, what do you mean the after of the ephod? So the word here is the after of the ephod. And so what is available was a sword of Goliath that David had killed, and it's wrapped in a cloth. But it is not telling us that it is where it is placed. right? It is not telling us where it is placed. It is telling us that it is after the effort, the after of the effort. Uh, it should tell us that in the ephod, which is the high priest garment, has the umim and the tumim. And it would imply, like I said, I am saying that it would imply that God has been consulted. God was consulted by using the umim and tumim in the ephod by Ahimelech. That would be how the narrative, at least in the Hebrew, would actually explain this to us. After the use of the ephod, then you would take it for yourself. Go ahead, take. Because God has said that it's okay. For there is no other except it here. There's nothing else, no weapons. And David said, right, there is nothing like it. Right? There's nothing like it. Give it to me. So it means that there is no other weapons. Why would there be weapons at the tabernacle in the first place? Because there are not armies there. And so with this, we are now told how Ahimelech had actually sought God with regards to the ephod. And understand the ephod is a high priest coat with the umim and tumim stones of decisions, of lots, to consult God. Verse 10, it says, David arose, escaped that day from Saul, and he went to Achish, the king of Gath. This is again a continuation of the word flee, that is run away from Saul as far as he can go. But the servants of Achish said to him, who is him? The king of Gath. That's him. And they were saying, is this not David, the king of the land? Notice the land. What land is this? The land of Israel. Did they not sing of this one as they danced, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, David his 10,000s, and this by word of mouth is the popularity of David preceding him. So even the Philistines know about David. Verse 12. David took these words to heart and greatly feared Achish, the king of Gath. Now we need to understand what all these mean. And so what it means is David had actually put these words, and it says to heart. This word heart is to his heart, or the word here is mind. And after he hears this, that they know that this is David. And so this is what it means. When it says David put these words to his heart, means to his mind, that David is now pondering over what is said. Number one, they have heard of David. Number two, they recognize David. And now remember, David is running away, trying to hide from Saul, and having people who are opposing you recognizing you is not a good thing. And so David listened to all these things that the servants of the king of Gath is saying, and he is now considering, because it says to mind means he has to consider. And in the consideration, he has to make a decision. Remember, when anything is brought to heart, it's not about feeling or emotion. And so he has to think. He greatly feared Achish, king of Gath. Now, this word fear is really be afraid. It's like being afraid of God. He is afraid of Gath. Why? Because this word implies, again, I'm just showing you the implication. Greatly feared would mean that he is fearful for his life. When you fear God, when God says, fear me, when men are to fear God, it is to fear God because God can take their lives. So you have to operate and make decisions with full understanding that God is a consuming fire. He can send fire from heaven to destroy you. And so fear God is to take that into consideration. And so David took these words into consideration, and he really feared the king of Gath about his life, because the king of Gath can take his life. Now you may be wondering, why didn't David do like how modern men would do, to seek God and pray to God for divine protection? And you never see this happening in the text that we have read, right? Whether it's a historical narrative or otherwise. Whenever somebody calls on God or knows that they are fighting God's battle, like David fighting Goliath, that this is the Lord's battle, apart from that, you don't see David calling on God for anything else. Because in the normal course of life, they know who God is, and they know and have knowledge and wisdom and strength to take care of themselves, and knowing how to deal with life in a just and fearful way of God. And so, what decisions did he make to protect his own life? And so, look at verse 13. Now, verse 13 is the third time that we are reading in First Samuel chapter 21 that he is now going into a role, playing pretense, saying things that, well, I guess in modern day view is not true, but it is okay. It is permissible because he is protecting his life. And in so doing, using his knowledge and wisdom to stay alive. And so look at verse 13. It says, he disguised himself. And this word here is he disguised himself, right? He disguised himself. Uh, I guess let's look at this as a whole. The word here is he disguised his sanity before them and acted insanely in their hands, and scribbled on the doors of the gate, and let his saliva run down his beard. Now, there are a few statements, but let us break down the first one first. It says here, he disguised his sanity. So let's take a look. He disguised himself is the meaning. He changed himself. This is the word here. He altered himself, right? He altered. And I guess you could say he changed, he altered, and the modern English word is he disguised himself. And what about himself that he was changing or altering? This word here, sanity before them. And let us break this down. The word sanity, or his sanity, means his taste, his perception. What else is this? His judgment, his intelligence. Now, if you take all of these together, you find that David has changed himself from the viewpoint of his taste of life. Maybe you can say that, right? His taste of life, his perception of things, his judgment of situation, his intelligence from someone who is very intelligent to someone who is not. And it says before them. The word before them means in their eyes. That the king and the servants can all see. Can all see. And then it says he acted, right? This word here, he acted insanely in their hands. Now, what does it mean to act insanely? I think you can say act insanely, as in the English, means that he is acting as a madman. That's the word. So he acted insanely in their hands. When he says in their hands, is that when they try to catch hold of him, he plays that role, right? That he's insane, that he is mad. And then the third part here is the description of how is it he's mad? How did he alter his own perception before them? Well, he says here, he scribbled, right? He scribbled on the doors of the gate. Now understand this. He scribbled on the doors of the gate. Doesn't mean he wrote anything down. The doors of the gate is wooden. And so what he did was, the word scribble here is that he marked. He marked or he scratched. He scratched the marks into the wood of the door. Like a madman, right? Like a madman. Using his nails, he would scratch and make marks or markings into the wooden doors of the gate. Then the final description is this. He let saliva run down into his beard. And that would be a picture of a madman. So if you can imagine, if you can just imagine, if this was David, he's got his hair, and then he's got his beard. And so you're thinking of this. His saliva is coming up all over, meaning he's making sounds where the saliva is all over his face. And in this case, it's all of his beard is running out of his mouth, so to speak. Now, what does all this depict? So you have here, if you pay close attention, we have here an A, a B, acting mad, a C, describing how he is mad, and D, again, describing exactly how that is mad. So you could either say an A and a B here, and you can say this is another A and a B as well, because this final part is a depiction of what mad is all about in the Hebrew sense, how they can see David pretending to be mad. Now, why did he need to pretend? Because he is fearful for his life. He is playing this role, getting into the role to protect his life. In our final two verses, this is what the king of Achish, right? Achish, the king of Gath, said to his servants, look, you see, now look at this. Now, this word see, right, is very important. You can actually visually look at David. Look at David. He is behaving as a madman, meaning he is, you see, the word here, you see a man, uh, raving. I think this would be a good way. He is a man raving. And this word here, raving, implies that he is insane or mad. And so when you look at this, it says you can see him. He is like a man raving all over, like a madman. Why do you bring him to me? Do I lack? Now, what do you mean, do I lack? Am I lacking? Am I lacking? Am I needing? Right? Am I in need of madmen? Am I in need of men who are raving? Right? Madmen, raving. Do I need people like that? That you have brought this one to act the madman in my presence? What does this mean? It says you have brought this one to, the word here, to act the madman, literally means to be raving as mad. It is not to act as a madman. Achish does not know that David is play acting here. So the word act here, I think, is a bit misleading. I think that we should see this as that you have brought this one to be raving, in my presence. Now, it doesn't really mean to my presence. It means that towards me. Okay, in my presence, this word here is towards me. So David, you find that you have Achish as the king, and you've got David with his beard crawling around, playing the madman. You find that Achish is complaining that he doesn't need any more madmen. Why did you bring him towards me? Why do you bring him to me in that sense? And then Achish says, shall this one come into my house? Because Achish was probably in his palace and the people saw that this was David. But David is now play acting as a madman and trying to escape for his life. But yet these men actually held on to him while he continues to play this madman role that Achish himself actually bought into this play acting. Now we come to the end of chapter 21 today, and we will continue tomorrow with chapter 22.